My dream grew darker, so that I have a sense, but little clear memory of the things that John experienced in both the pool and the great catacombs, paved sometimes with water, sometimes with stone, and upon winding stairways in the live rocks, whereby he and Virtue ascended through the inwards of the mountain to the land beyond Pecatum Adae. He learned many mysteries in the earth and passed through many elements, dying many deaths. One thing has come through into my waking memory. Of all the people he had met in his journey, only wisdom appeared to him in the caverns, and troubled him by saying that no man could really come where he had come, and that all his adventures were but figurative, for no professed experience of these places could be anything other than mythology. But then another voice spoke to him from behind, saying, "Child, if you will, it is mythology. It is but truth, not fact, an image, not the very real. But then it is my mythology. The words of wisdom are also myth and metaphor, but since they do not know themselves for what they are, in them the hidden myth is master, where it should be servant, and it is but of man's inventing. But this is my inventing. This is the veil under which I have chosen to appear even from the first until now. For this end I made your senses, and for this end your imagination, that you might see my face and live. What would you have? Have you not heard among the pagans in the story of Semele? Or was there any age in any land when men did not know that corn and wine were the blood and body of a dying and yet living God? And not so long after that, the light and color, as with the sound of a trumpet, rushed back upon my dreaming eyes, and my ears were full of the sounds of birds and the rustle of leaves, for John and Virtue had come up out of the earth and into the green forests of the land beyond the canyon. That, my friends, is one of my favorite passages that I came across in The Pilgrim's Regress by C.S. Lewis. This was my June Inkling Along pick, and I think I read it alone, and that's perfectly okay, because if you're able to watch this retroactively, you can still hear my thoughts about it and talk about it with me, because I'd still love to talk about this book. This is one that I think is going to merit a very, very deep second read. There's just so much chock full in this book that you can blink and miss some of the things that are mentioned. And it's got some really deep stuff that it tries to hit on in here. The reason why that passage stood out to me so much is because very recently I did a reading of Mythopoeia from Tolkien, who said in response to Lewis that, myths are a vital piece of the puzzle for religion, and that instead of making it so that religion feels less true and less real, they are what deepens our foundational understanding of them. And so seeing that passage in there where mythology is talked about reminded me of Tolkien and Lewis in that conversation that they had, which ultimately led to C.S. Lewis converting to Christianity. And this was his first book that he wrote after that conversion. So it very much stuck with C.S. Lewis and stayed on his mind. Now, in this one, we're following the adventures of John, and as he's going from his hometown where he was at and going on a journey and trying to find an island that he can see, that he hears about. He knows that there's a landlord and has all kinds of questions about this landlord and what he can do and why he's there, and he meets some really interesting characters. And because it is in the vein of the Pilgrim's Progress, obviously they have names that give you a hint of who they are, such as virtue and reason and wisdom and things like that. And you can tell when they get there what sort of interactions, what sort of arguments might be made. And some of the people that are represented in here show the knowledge base that Lewis had. There were names and ideas that even I wasn't familiar with, because Lewis was far more familiar with the ancient thought, people of thought, the medieval thinkers, and what they wrote about, what they thought, than I am. And so that makes me excited to dive back into this at some point in time. Now, in the author's afterword, this is Lewis talking 10 years after he wrote the thing and going back and revisiting, and he can see, of course, like any author could, all the flaws in there. And one of the things that he professes is that he didn't realize that not everybody's journey from where he was as a non-thinker in the path that he followed, he didn't realize that not everybody had followed a very similar path to him, which I guess probably showed a little bit of his naivete in terms of the interpersonal world. He was a very intelligent guy. He had a close circle of friends, obviously, with the Inklings and Tolkien and all of that. But I think that it kind of shocked him that not everybody would have followed the same journey that he went on. And that journey is in some ways reflected in the travels here by John, going through all of these different places and running into these characters and having to grapple with certain temptations and ideas that sound appealing and figuring out why they get debunked. And the very last part of this is the regress, where he's taken back after having made it to the end and is journeying back to where it all began. And he's able to see these things along the way that he had run into, and is given kind of an explanation of why that would have been a less satisfactory path for his life than where he ended up. And so it's a really, really deep and interesting thing to see, whether you believe or not, whether you think like C.S. Lewis or not, to kind of see how he was grappling with these ideas upon first coming to become a Christian. Now, obviously, a book like Mere Christianity is going to be what you would look to first and foremost to get an idea of C.S. Lewis as his maturing thoughts on the Christian life and all of that. But this is a good case study of how he thought, and it's a very fast read in terms of the pacing. The chapters are super short. It's broken down into a lot of different sections. It's a fun read. Every time it came out, I was enjoying myself. I had to stop myself from getting too far ahead because I knew at least one person was going to be trying to read it with me over the course of the month. And so finally, this last weekend, I had to say, okay, I've got to just dive in it and get to the end. And I absolutely loved every step of the way. And as I told Victoria from A Musical Bookworm, who I think is still planning to read this at some point in time, this might be one of my 5 favorite C.S. Lewis books so far. Now, I've by no means read everything by C.S. Lewis, but this is so good. It's so enjoyable, and it was such a refreshing change of pace after going through some of the deeper entanglement of his writing style in the Space Trilogy. The Space Trilogy I really, really loved. At least the first 2 books. The third one was a bit of a disappointment. But going from those, which were kind of slower reads because everything was just so dense and packed, to something that was like this, to where I could just pick it up and just moved along at a good, nice pace, a good clip, and being able to enjoy that was just a really fun and enjoyable read for me. And it definitely is a 5-star for me. It may not be 5 stars for everybody by any means, but it was enjoyable. I did read part of the Pilgrim's Progress as part of a reread. I ended up not finishing that this month just because I was running out of time and I wanted to prioritize what I was reading and chose to go with ones that I was excited about rather than ones that were going to be a reread for me. I do plan to get back to that and do a full reread of the Pilgrim's Progress at some point in time. But yeah, it was absolutely fascinating book. I enjoyed it greatly. I was pleasantly surprised at the very end. You know, you see the dragon on there. Towards the end, we've got dragons in the book, and there's even a couple of pages throughout where there's nice images in here that get added in, and I just absolutely loved it. It's different than most of the other books that I have on my shelf in terms of how they read and what they contain. if you enjoy the Narnia Chronicles, you'll probably enjoy this as well. It feels like his writing voice was very similar to what he had in the Chronicles of Narnia versus some of his denser works like the Space Trilogy. So that is my review on The Pilgrim's Regress. I highly recommend it if you haven't read it and like C.S. Lewis, like the Chronicles of Narnia. Definitely pick this one up because it is worth checking out. So thank you for watching.